So I'm just going to provide an update on some of the legislation I thought that you'd be most interested in and the legislative initiatives, what's happening in that liquor law space. That from your feedback, you'd obviously have a strong focus on and you want to hear about at this forum. First of all, I just want to provide a bit of context, though, about the regulatory framework and the legislative initiatives and various interventions and measures that the government introduces and what the context in which those measures are introduced. OLGR applies a targeted approach to regulatory intervention. So while there are some issues that are statewide and we have a statewide consistent approach on, we also have others that are influenced by the characteristics of the local area or by the licensed venues that are concerned. And we need to be agile and adaptive when we're responding to those issues. We need to be able to focus on how wide the issue is, how wide the problem is, what are the most effective responses to that, while also keeping in mind that these are businesses operating in a fairly heavily regulated environment, and we need to balance that regulatory intervention with the need for businesses to be able to undertake their day-to-day operations. And that's done through acknowledging the level of risk and focusing on that level of risk. We have there's a pyramid on the screen here which sort of illustrates the legislative framework. In it, at the top of that we have a Liquor Act, and we have regulations which apply across the board. We have licence conditions, many of which are in the legislation, but others which are applied individually to venues. And then we have our voluntary efforts and guidance, guidelines and various information that we provide as a regulator. And so our interventions are often targeting individual venues or are targeting a precinct, such as Sydney CBD and Kings Cross being probably the most recognisable ones at the moment. And then we have that statewide approach in a more general sense, and I'll get to some of the issues of that in a moment. I want to talk just about plans of management because, particularly in Sydney CBD and Kings Cross, that's a major focus for us as a regulator over the last, since 2012 really, in relation to Kings Cross. Plans of management in Kings Cross, there was a plan of management introduced in December 2012 and then it was further added to in December 2013. And that plan introduced a range of drink restrictions and other measures that licensed venues needed to implement in order to address some of the concerns and the issues around alcohol-related violence in Kings Cross. And then, of course, we had a plan of management introduced in May last year, midway through last year for the Sydney CBD, which also included a whole range of conditions and restrictions targeting particularly high-risk activities and higher-risk venues in the Sydney CBD precinct. In Kings Cross, we've had the ID scanners commence operation midway through last year as well under that plan of management framework. We are there is a review and evaluation process in place for plans of management. There was a review undertaken of the Kings Cross plan of management, and there's been a summary of the outcomes of that on our website since May this year. And that review involved consultation with all the local stakeholders, the businesses, the police. We looked at some of the responses from patrons, and also we consulted with local community representatives there as well. There is a review and evaluation process underway in relation to Sydney CBD plan of management. So that evaluation is being undertaken by New South Wales Treasury through the Centre for Program Evaluation, and that's a two-stage process. There's a evaluation first stage that's being finalised around now, and then there'll be a final report and a wrap of that evaluation around midway through next year. And that will help to inform the future direction for the plan of management, and it also complements some other reviews and evaluations that are underway. So the one that's probably the most closely watched, or will be once it commences, is the lockout and last drinks review, which will commence in February next year. Just a bit of background to what's been happening with lockouts and last drinks. I'm sure you're familiar with those measures that have been introduced in Sydney CBD and Kings Cross. The Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research has undertaken some research around the outcomes, and those outcomes have been quite positive in terms of reducing assaults in those precincts, and there's been significant reductions between February and September last year. For example, 26% reduction in Sydney CBD in assaults and 32% reduction in King's Cross. Interestingly, the Bureau found at that time that there wasn't a statistically significant increase in assaults in what we'd call displacement areas. And so that research didn't find that the assaults that were being reduced by significant numbers in Sydney CBD and King's Cross were being displaced to nearby areas. Now, there has been some further information come from the Bureau and others since then, which is giving us an idea about what's happening in both the Sydney CBD, King's Cross precincts and in the neighbouring areas. And we are seeing some increase in incidents in the Piedmont area around the Star Casino. And we have seen a small increase in incidents in Newtown. But at the moment, it's difficult to characterise those as being true displacements. Certainly the overall drop in incident numbers in Sydney CBD and King's Cross is not being replicated by any increases outside those areas. So one of the other measures that was introduced last year was a restriction on takeaway alcohol sales, restricted to 10 p.m. And that's a statewide restriction, which was introduced to address concerns around late night drinking, public drinking, and alcohol-related violence associated with that. There is a review underway of that restriction as well, which is separate from the other reviews and evaluations I mentioned. There's quite a number of them at the moment. They are all coming together, though, in the first half of next year, and there will be a lot of activity by government and with stakeholders through the consultation process and engagement process during that time. But we have started the 10 p.m. review, and the stage one of that review is focused on the impact of that restriction in regional and remote areas of New South Wales, or rural areas of New South Wales. And that's coming to an end at the moment. That stage one will then inform the larger review that will focus on the 10 p.m. restriction across New South Wales, which will occur again around early to midway through next year. That'll be finalised. And all of that will then come together to inform the government's policy direction for the future of Sydney CBD and King's Cross interventions, and also the sort of statewide restrictions, particularly this 10 p.m. takeaway sales measure. There will be, as I said, opportunities for all stakeholders to have an input into those reviews. The review process, government has a strong commitment to a very strong evaluation and review process that is underpinned by consultation with all relevant stakeholders, and that's set out very clearly in a whole lot of government policy directions that are available through the New South Wales Government website. So certainly all stakeholders will have an opportunity to contribute to that review and evaluation process. Also wanted to mention a couple of other reviews that are underway. So the 3 strike scheme, which was introduced from 1 January 2012, which applies strikes where there is non-compliance with the most serious offence provisions under the Liquor Act. That scheme, the legislation requires that it be reviewed after 4 years of operation. So we've had 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015. That review is starting now. We want to make sure that review is well underway early next year so that we can wrap that up fairly quickly, and it can then also inform all of the other reviews and evaluations that are underway during that first half of next year. There will be, again, an opportunity for contributions from stakeholders, industry, community groups, police, local government into the review of the 3 strike scheme. I wanted to briefly mention the intoxication guidelines that were introduced earlier this year, which came out of the changes to the legislation that were implemented following the review of the Liquor Act last year. So those intoxication guidelines are there to assist licensees to understand what sort of measures are considered appropriate and effective and reasonable in order for licensees to minimise the potential for intoxication on licensed premises. But they're also important because they hook into the provision in the Liquor Act that provides licensees with a sort of defence where intoxication is found to occur on licensed premises. And so if intoxication is detected and licensees can demonstrate that these measures have been implemented, that is a way that licensees can essentially have a type of defence to that intoxication provision. So it's important, while they're not strictly speaking mandatory, we certainly encourage licensees to have regard to them, and licensees who want to comply completely with that regulatory framework around intoxication, it's important that licensees be aware and staff be aware of the measures in those intoxication guidelines. I want to wrap up by just talking briefly about the annual licence fee scheme. We've now had an opportunity to have a full first year of experience with that scheme. There's been a lot of learning for OLGR and also for industry and our stakeholders when we've been implementing that scheme. And you know, it's true to say that there's been a few issues along the way, and I think one of the benefits of the licence fee scheme is that it allows us to improve the way we do things, the way we engage with our stakeholders, the way we engage particularly with licensees, so that we can be better at responding to the issues that industry raises, but also have a smoother operation of this scheme. So licence fees are fairly common these days across a whole range of licences and certainly in the liquor space in other jurisdictions. Just a few sort of outcomes, I suppose. Approximately 90% of licensees or licensed premises in New South Wales pay their base fee only, so around 10% paid additional loadings for trading hours. Approximately 15% of licensees took advantage of the option to reduce their trading hours, so thereby reducing the level of fee that they paid. Either trading hours reduced back to 1:30 a.m. for a reduced trading hour loading, or back to midnight for no loading. Just over 1,000 licensees paid their fee late, so they incurred a late payment fee. And as a result of the first round of the fees, we had around 3,300 licences cancelled. And we understand we were expecting a significant number of cancellations in that first round because our database over the years hadn't kept up with what was occurring in industry, with licensees moving on, particularly in the on-premises space, and not advising us. So therefore, there were a lot of phantom licences in existence. And so we've been able to cleanse our database to know that the licences we have on a record now are actually active licences that people are using or people want to continue. In terms of business readiness, we're planning to conduct an update for licensees to update their contact details and also provide a further fee estimate in a short while, as we did last year. So we're trying to make it easier for licensees to provide updated details to us so that we don't end up with some of the problems we had with miscommunication or people not receiving communication during this year's fee scheme. And some service developments and improvements for 2016. So the fee schemes enabled us to, I suppose, have some resources to improve service to stakeholders and particularly to licensees. So we're looking at SMS and email options, notices for as part of the licence fee scheme. And we're looking at different payment options, particularly through Service New South Wales, which can provide a better payment option for those who wish to pay by visiting a physical counter. Service New South Wales venues are open extended hours, and also there's online capability there. And Service New South Wales can also provide advice and service to customers, to licensees around the licence fee scheme.